Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everybody. I'm Preacher Mars, host of the SOS, the Shout Out Show. I hope you're having a fabulous Sunday, full of peace, full of fellowship, full of family, and full of love. Listen, today's topic is something that's near and dear to me. I know I say that a lot, but I do choose topics that are near and dear to me. But today is a little bit near and dear to me. A lot of you know that, in addition to being a comedian, for a lot of years, my biggest passion was serving children. Sort of like in the background you see behind me, that was my first stage, if you will, working with these young boys and young girls, particularly in inner city settings, trying to some regards bring hope, bring knowledge to resurrect a lot of things that have gone wrong in public education. Of course, my field was special ed. I taught severely most disturbed children. That was my advocacy. That was my choice, brothers and sisters. Back in 1991, 92, in the city of Milwaukee, they had a deficit. They did not have enough teachers to go into the classrooms to teach these kids, which they deemed severely most disturbed or hard to learn special needs children. I left Washington, D.C. I took a pay cut, a sizable pay cut, and came to Milwaukee in the hopes of being able to educate these kids. What I found out was they were educating me. The scope of our children from 1992 up until now hasn't necessarily changed. The technology has changed, but the needs of the children still remain fairly consistent. And then, on top of it being fairly consistent, it is nuanced by the fact that children learning these days is politicized. You now have a situation about being able to essentially being able to, for lack of a better word, reduce debt, be reduce that for students to be able to go to college and things like that. In the scope that we're trying to create pathways to enable people to be students and in some regards become teachers. President Joe Biden is going to introduce a bill, an education bill, in the next couple weeks. And that education bill is going to address the fact that we have a public education crisis. We've reached the nexus at this point in time, brothers and sisters, where teachers are not in demand enough. When I say, let me correct. The supply of teachers does not meet the demand of the students in a classroom across the United States of America. Slowly but surely, public education has suffered. It suffered from the aspect of budget cuts. It suffered from the aspect of the stigma of public education not being as good as private education. And it suffered from the aspect that funding has been cut year after year after year, despite the needs of the students grow and grow and grow. Today's topic will be talking about addressing public education because someone is getting lost in the whole fray. The pressure on teachers to teach children is one thing, but the pressure on children to be able to be able to count on teachers, have accountability, and look for responsible teachers in the classroom to educate them and also to lead them is the thing that we're looking at today. Teachers have lost confidence in the public school system because they lost confidence in public policy that affects students. Things like each one teach one, take the village to raise children, no one left behind. Very, very good catchphrases. But they they rarely ever addressed the idea that students had particular needs. And the particular needs reflected that policy needed to change. It needed to adapt. For example, they say 20% of the teachers in classroom, only 20% of the teachers in classroom are teachers of color. I'm not even saying not all black people. This is Latino, this is Native American, this is a lot of, but 20%. In the city of Philadelphia, the number is even more startling because 90% of the kids in public education in Philadelphia are black. But here again, you have the teachers who are mostly white. Now, this is not to say they're not capable. This is not to say that they're not talented. This is not to say that they're not committed. This is to say that those people who are in those cities, that are in those communities, that are in those neighborhoods, now they're beginning to disappear. And we have to really be forthright and address why they're disappearing. What kind of confidence have they lost in the American community, the American process that at one point in time boasted the greatest education system in the world? Now, we're not the greatest education system in the world. You can go top 10. America's not in the top 10 for public education. We're not even in the top 10 for trying to reform public education, brothers and sisters. And why is it important? It's important because when I sleep sometimes, I have memories, dreams, and sometimes nightmares that the people behind me that you see, these young faces, are not being taken care of. And we're not providing them the opportunities they need in terms of educational experience. And I fear, even they're doing this, they're addressing this thing, and they're addressing it quietly because it will become a political football between the GOP and the Democrats and the liberals and the progressives and the conservatives. It will become a political football because all of them in the political spaces, in the political hierarchies, are responsible for the problem that we're facing right now. Without further ado, brothers and sisters, let's get to it. This is a shout out show, Preacher Moss. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the official kickoff of our Sunday Potluck, which is addressing public education. First and foremost, I want to give thanks and blessings to the Most High Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As well, I want to give a shout out to all of you folks that come in and check the show out. I know you have things to do, but I appreciate you. And if I don't tell you I appreciate you, it's not that I don't. It's not that I forgot. Sometimes I'm out of pocket, and I ask that you forgive me. Sometimes I don't remember to say it. You got to say thank you to people in a correct place and time. Where did I learn that? I learned it in school. I learned it from my parents, and it was reinforced in school. Before we get into the meat of our conversation, brothers and sisters, let's give some shout outs to some folks that are in the building. Basically, we want to give a shout out to Sister Ree. Ree, how you doing? I hope everything's going well. Hope your trip is beneficial and you get some peace. Shout out to Reed's family, Derek, Juwan. Hope everybody's doing well. Next up, here the man is again, our Canadian ambassador to the Shout Out Show. We're the only show that has an ambassador, and I'm proud in all of Canada that we were blessed with Brother Altaf Rashid, who comes in the show. I guess, Altaf, if I couldn't make the show, I would leave it to your hands and you and Sultana's hands to make it happen, because I believe you have that ability. You've seen this show enough times. I think you could do it. You and Ree probably do your own show. You don't even necessarily need me. But I appreciate you for coming on the show. And let me make sure I make this very, very clear. While I'm the host of the show, I don't claim to own the idea of the show. A shout out is not something you own. A shout out is something you give. This is a platform. This is a community platform. And the reason why I say that, because a lot of times viewers suffer the idea of the host talking to them or talking at them, but not having a real conversation. One of the beauties of watching Oprah Winfrey back in the days, Oprah Winfrey knew how to have a community discussion. There's a young guy. I really enjoy this. His name is Kwame Brown. Kwame Brown is making he's stirring up some dust, good dust, if you ask me, in the journalism world. And he has his own podcast. And what I like about Kwame Brown is he understands the merits of listening to people and encouraging them to express themselves, but also have another opinion. Again, having that conversation. What we got next? Adam Khan. I know Adam is going to be on this topic today. We're addressing public education. Altaf and Adam, I'd love to get your take on public education in Canada. I'd love to get your ideology on public education in Canada. Did you go to public school? Did you go to private school? Let us know. Adam, good to see you on the show. Wow, alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother. Appreciate you. And we got my brother on the show, Johnny Thomas, JT, my main man, my little brother. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Now, I believe JT can actually provide some insight about our topic today, addressing public education. He had a young man that went to public school, not public school, went to charter school, and then he wound up going to private school. And, it worked out. Don't get me wrong, it worked out. But, he's been in a space where he actually had worked at a charter school, and he can kind of give you a lot of the ins and outs, the nuances. Every charter school, just because you got a charter doesn't mean that you're automatically a good school. You're going to have the same growing pains and the same responsibilities and the same liabilities as public school. But of course, anything moving away from public school over the last 15, 20 years, whether it's charter schools, whether it's vouchers, whether it's Catholic schools, it has been this all over assault that public education just does not work. I disagree. Public education turns out the most amount of students that there is. Adam, what do you say? What I said about public school is true in so many aspects of American life. A belief in American exceptionalism that is not backed up by facts. You have hit the nail on the head, my brother. You have hit the nail on the head talking about American exceptionalism. We believe that our school system is more than capable of assuming any other education system out there. And it's not the education system that we're talking about. It's the scope that, and this is a bad thing, and it would be in any language, in any school, but it's this idea that this education is absolute when I give it to you, that you can't question it. And we're dealing with that right now. We're dealing with it in a huge way, and I'm going to talk about it. Next up, who we have? Oh, we got the subject. Well, let me give a shout out. She forgot herself. Shout out to Sister Satana Whitfield, who's working the back, the ones and twos on the production side. Thank you so much. You guys may not know this, but Sister Satana was trying to tough it out. She was not feeling well last couple days following her vaccination shot. It happens, but we appreciate you for toughing it out. Thank you very much. Now, many of you are going to know from our past discussions and shows that we had, I started out in public education. I don't know if it was the golden age of public education. And when I say the golden age of public education, it meant that you had a framework for teachers college and the idea of a generation of people that used education to elevate themselves was very, very close to me in proximity. I had great proximity to people who grew up in racism, segregation, or Jim Crow type of education, but were able to go to schools, Howard University, HBCUs, as well as, some of the leading, white colleges. They had made the transition, the inroads were there. A large majority of those people engage in public education. My mother did public education. My father did public education. I can say all of my other relatives, my aunts and uncles, they all did public education. Now, what people should know is that public education was not always a given. It was not always a given. It was meant to give you some skills. It was meant to give you some talents, if you will. But back then, it was meant to make sure, particularly in the African-American experience and the Latino experience, it was enough to give you enough skills to work for somebody else. That's the truth. You had enough skills to work for somebody else. We talked about a couple shows about getting it out of the dirt. Getting it out of the dirt was not just those farmers establishing revenue and business for themselves. They were establishing culture. And one part of that culture, of course, was schools, education. Now, you can say what you want about slaves and but I'm going to tell you about these were some of the most advanced people in terms of vision that you're literally ever going to talk about. And I think sometimes that's what we lose. So let me now JT is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I taught in Milwaukee public schools for a fair amount of years, left and went out to teach in California. Now, what he's put on the screen, I want you to take time to absorb it. Can you bring that up, Satana? Okay, I'll do it. He says MPS Milwaukee Public Schools spend an enormous amount of money on remedial education as opposed to uh, remedial education as opposed to remedial education, which provides a child with the ability to grow and expand his educational option. Well, we got remedial there twice. I think somewhere um, remedial education as opposed to regular education. I think that might be what JT was saying. And he's right. The business of remedial education is a huge market, if you will. The idea of special ed, special needs, at one point in time was part of the school budget, but then it morphed into its own case, if you will, its own byline in terms of how education worked, how education didn't work. In many regards, it was spread out. I remember when I was in fifth grade, sixth grade, you had the kids on the little yellow bus. But back then, though, they were separated from everybody. They were in a hallway. It was the most draconian thing you could think of. But the kids were in a part of the school and we never went there. We used to call it the dungeon. And we would see these kids, but we would hardly never see them on playground things. They were isolated kids. By the time I got into teaching, the laws had changed. In Milwaukee, it wasn't called special education, it was called exceptional education, which was the first aspects of trying to mainstream kids, special need kids, into regular education, which was regular education culture. The thing that we have now is two crises. Number one, we have a deficit in people that want to teach special ed, particularly kids with special needs, emotional problems, i.e., a lot of Black kids, a lot of Latino kids. But it also bears the brunt now that the school system, if you will, has in many regards gotten rid of the budget. It's gotten rid of the budget. There's been an all-out assault on public school budgets for about the last, I want to say going back to 93, an all-out war, if you will, against public schools. And it's literally about how can we siphon off money from public school funds to fund other type of education. What's happened in the last couple of years is that teachers have gotten tired. And we're going to talk about that because coming out of this pandemic, brothers and sisters, there will be an education crisis. And it's that fact that teachers have lost confidence in the policymakers that don't teach anybody, the policymakers don't come to PTA meetings, the policymakers that don't understand curriculum and instruction. They have lost the trust in these policymakers and they're retiring early. They're finding other careers. We were talking a couple of days ago about how we have all these jobs and people go, but we don't have enough labor, enough people to fill the jobs. One of the things that they're talking about right now is the amount of teachers. All right, we got Sultana popping back in. We're talking about the amount of teachers who are not returning to the workforce. Let me throw this out. I'll talk about something here. It's a public education system in Canada is at the will of the provincial political party in power. Education is the easiest place where cuts are made. I have friends I went to school with that moved to the U.S. to teach because of the lack of opportunities. I didn't even think that. I thought that, somehow Canada, because of the way it's set up, was a lot better. But you know what? It tells you that educational systems, educational forums, if you will, can run educators out of the business. And we're literally, like I said, we are literally beginning to look at the fact that teachers don't want to do that job anymore. I think before the pandemic, you had a problem. Let me say this. Before the pandemic, you had a problem. In the time of from 2016 to 2020, there has been an assault on public schools to the point where it's not just a loss of confidence, brothers and sisters. you now have people questioning the merits of becoming a teacher. See, when I was a teacher, all I need to do was look at these little faces behind me. They inspired me. The system, in some regards, has broken the will of the teacher through things of merit based pay. And how are you going to do merit based pay? If your kids get a great job, if you will, then the kids, then you're a good teacher. If the kids struggle, then you're not a good teacher. Where is that coming from? Where is that coming from? My pay is based on how my children perform, how my students perform. See how I just threw that in there? I just how my children perform, because that's the way teachers think. How my students perform, that's how you base that's how I'm basically reviewed as a teacher. Test scores. Now, we're not talking about the fact that a child may have had a deficit 2-3 years coming into my classroom. Somehow I'm expected to make it up. And unfortunately, kids suffer. They suffer because the teachers that they started bringing in, they were warm bodies. Now, believe me, there are millions upon millions upon millions of educated teachers and people who make the education system work despite itself. But there are people who should not be teaching. Likewise, there are people that should not be talking about education because you're not wanting to educate the kids. You're trying to manipulate the system to produce a certain product. Does that make sense? I want to produce a certain product. Got a word here from Adam Kahn. Adam went to French immersion public school. The Canadian K-12 school structure is more complex because of the French language and the Catholic Church. So there are 4 boards: English, public English, Catholic, French, public. Okay. All right. Let me tell you how special ed works. Special ed is almost an autocratic system that once somebody puts together what's called an IEP, an individualized education program, we put that on a child. And as the child goes to first grade, second grade, that file just gets bigger and bigger unless the child gets out of special ed. Here's the deal. Most kids don't get out of special ed. You have very few situations where that happens. And I'm just calling it what it is. Not that the kids aren't capable, but I don't know if the system recognizes what happens. It's almost like jail. A guy goes in for prison. The only time you see that guy is when he's trying to make an appeal or he's up for parole. If you don't see him, he's just back in the system. We don't see him. And that's sort of, sadly what it's come down to in some cases when we start talking about what these kids need, why they need it this way. And I think overall, the thing that's really, really suffering, and you can jump in any way you want to, the politics of school, brothers and sisters, the politics of school have meshed with the politics of the country. Think about that. We now have to talk about gun control. Why? Because we have assaults on our schools. We have Sandy Hooks. We have school shootings. We have Columbine. We have all these things, brothers and sisters, that go beyond the actual idea of being able to teach. They once even had a referendum out, a bill out that teacher would be able to carry in class. It's nothing to do with the educational process that they would carry in class. And I'd say this, because what does that say? For too long in inner city schools, before you had all these school shootings, by the way, kids would have to go through metal detectors. Why? Because the inner city schools were so bad and da 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 da. They have to, you have to go through a metal detector and put your keys here and whoop whoop. And you had all the security. Meanwhile, in the suburbs, people are shooting up everything. And what does that say? Is it a reflection of the kids or a reflection of the policy? Is it a reflection of the fact that we have castigated public schools to be nothing but warehouses for failure? In and out of that, brothers and sisters, let me tell you something about inner city schools. While they're underfunded, understaffed, and overburdened, they perform miracles. They produce students and opportunities irregardless of money, irregardless of position. And it has to do with the merit of the people who come there to work those positions, not just the teachers and the principals. We're talking about the maintenance guy. The maintenance guy at the school is one of the most important people in the world because he talks to the kids and he lets them know that this is my job. And sometimes he goes, you know what? Had my education been a little bit better, I wouldn't be the maintenance guy. However, he goes, while I'm the maintenance guy, this is the education I had to go through to make sure that I'm suitable for this job. And it's not the maintenance guy; he's a janitor. He's an engineer at the school. He makes things go, brothers and sisters. Without him, the school collapses. We began to think about these things. I talk about my sixth grade teacher, Miss Jones, all the time. Miss Alvita Jones. In the sixth grade, I thought that she was the meanest black woman God ever put on earth. By the time I graduated college, I said, Miss Jones is one of the most intelligent women that God put on earth because she taught us not just education, she taught us how to inspire ourselves. And the thing that's coming through, and I'm going to talk to Brother Jad, I'm going to address uh, Adrian right here in a minute. It's the idea that our teachers are deflated. One of the biggest slaps in the face was the fact that our Secretary of Education was not an educator. Betsy DeVos, she bought her position. And she bought a position to do business, to make sure that students get taxed at the highest rates for what? Student loans. Even during the pandemic. Even though the judge said don't do it, she still was trying to make sure that kids had to pay on their debts. They weren't even working, they weren't even in school. She had no education about education. She never taught. She was never a principal. She never a policymaker. Never did curriculum instruction. She did nothing. In fact, this is a woman talking about public school, and I know for a fact she sent all of her kids to private school. Her job, brothers and sisters, was to destroy the public school narrative as much as she could, to wipe it off the face of the earth and take the money and give it to all these private institutions who were struggling financially, who are still struggling financially. That is not education, brothers and sisters. That is educational terrorism. That's what it is. To these faces right here, she never saw. And I get very upset because I wanted to put this clip on. And let me jump to a comment right here. I taught reading the first grade. First grade is low in reading, rotating between 6 classes, and they cut the budget for the aides. Here we go. I had 2 aides. Big shout out to Miss Rambo and Miss Franklin. They cut the budget to the aides. That was in 2000. Not sure if commitment to improve reading is better or worse, but I imagine worse. Best job ever, but when funding is eliminated for upcoming teachers, it was a deterrent that continues that path, unfortunately. Miss Jasper, are you still teaching? That'd be a great question to ask. Are you still teaching? Get back to me when you can. Now, for myself, brothers and sisters, you guys have been riding along with me. I just got my master's. I got my master's in Islamic education. And I'm going to say, Sister Jasper says she's not teaching anymore. And I'm going to get to this, and I know I have to wrap up. One of the things I was doing, I was studying, and my degree, my master's was supposed to be in Islamic studies and Islamic leadership. And somewhere along the line, I said, well, where's your skill set? You have all these years of educating children, parents, the community, if you will, through comedy, but also being a classroom teacher. And I said, the fiduciary responsibility, if I'm going to have an honest conversation between myself and my Lord, is the fact that I left teaching because I was frustrated. Not because I wasn't good. I was frustrated. And I felt that the process beat me down. And I felt that it was disingenuous to sit around with kids and tell them you could be the best when I couldn't be the best. And that's why I left. I said, let me do this education thing. At least I can educate people my own way without having to worry about You know what I'm saying? We're having to worry about this curriculum and things like that. And that's another thing, brothers and sisters, the curriculum. So my mom said respect, support, and compensation for teachers is bottom out. Yeah. Even now, brothers and sisters, this bill is going to come up with President Joe Biden, and they're going to talk about all the things about recruiting teachers. They're going to talk about all the things about recruiting teachers and making them feel comfortable and mentor teachers. But you know that they're not going to address? It's already out. They're not going to address salaries. They're not going to address salaries. Comedian Robert Townsend had one of the best bits ever. One of the best bits ever. And he said, how come we pay all this money for athletes to play sports? We just watch them. And he said, but the people who do the most, which is educate our kids, they're treated the worst. He said, wouldn't it be a great thing if they called the lineup for teachers like they do for a football game or sporting event? And now, in ninth grade science, we have Miss Johnson. She's coming out of Howard University. She has her teacher certification, and she's making $96,000 a year. Miss Johnson. And that people were drawn to teaching. That people literally, for lack of a better word, the people literally wanted to teach. And the salaries were there, and the inspiration is there. I'm gonna throw that out. Ms. Jaffa, however, completed an Islamic workbook for students. Another way to teach. Alhamdulillah. If you have that workbook, if it's on Amazon, try to get the link to us maybe tomorrow if you don't mind, because education has to happen. I think people should know that too. So the thing about education that these policymakers don't understand is that to learn is a natural disposition. Whether you learn right or you learn wrong, it's a natural disposition. Education helps frame how you learn. It frames how you learn to engage and interact with the community and the environment around you. I'm going to put this up, brothers and sisters. If anybody's interested in Miss Jasper's book, go to www.adrianjasper.com. That's an Islamic workbook for your students. Like you said, it's another way to teach. I wish I had a copy of the workbook, but I don't. But go to www.adrianjasper.com. All right, my brothers and sisters, I have to jump off, but I'm going to say this. Please make dua for our teachers. Please make dua for our teachers. They need our support in the absence of political leadership out of the Congress, out of the Senate. I literally watched something on TV where a congressman went through a bill that they put for education textbooks, and the Republicans sent out another bill. Now, I'm not even going to go GOP, whatever. I'm going to talk about intent. And in this back and forth exchange, the man said, essentially, you've taken out every person of color in this textbook. You took out Martin Luther King's speech. You took out Malcolm X's speech. You took out things about Native Americans and treaties. You took out stuff about Susan B. Anthony. And the guy said, yeah, well, because we're not 100% sure. Well, if you're 100% sure, that's what it's called, research. How are you going to affect other people's learning when, hell, you don't want to learn? Think about this. So Adams put a thing up, brothers and sisters. I'm going to let it run through the end because we got to jump off. Go to www.TED.com. Talks Rita Pearson, every kid needs a champion. So go to TED Talks. I think it would be Rita Pearson, every kid needs a champion. Make sure that you check that out. Thank you so much, Adam. So on behalf of myself and these kids that I no longer teach, but they're still our kids, and whether in the classroom or not, we still have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure they have opportunities to learn. When I say learn, I mean have a robust education, but learn with security, confidence, and safety. So I'm going to get out of here. You guys have been amazing. I hope that we can have a really robust conversation about these things instead of talking about education in such a foreboding way. like we're always waiting for the other shoe to drop with education. And I don't know exactly what's in this bill that's going to be coming down. I think it's $1.9 trillion bill or something like that. We got a lot of bills out here, but addressing the public education infrastructure is long overdue. And a lot of people don't understand it was gutted in the last administration. They gutted a lot of it. And even in Obama's administration, they gutted some of it because they didn't understand the scope of, you know, public schools have a vital interest. Community schools are one of the most important. Let me say that. They're one of the most important institutions that you can have. And think about this, and I'll go. What if you put Harvard in the middle of Harlem? Hmm? What if you put the top high school in the middle of Detroit, or the middle of DC, or the middle of LA, Compton, Fifth Ward, any of these spots? What do you think the nature of that learning community would be? What characteristics would they take on? They would take on the characteristics of people who respect the institutional learning because they said this is a learning organization. Hear me now, a learning organization, and they address themselves as such. So, brothers and sisters, before I get out, let me give a shout out to our sponsors really quick, and shout out again to Miss Kate who came on yesterday. Uh, Let me take that off of there. Had a great show talking about being financially independent. Check that show out if you didn't get a chance to check it out. It's a great show. If you want to know more about being financially independent, go to www.befinanciallyindependent.com. Again, that's www.befinanciallyindependent.com, or you can call 1-800-679-3175. Again, that's 1-800-679-3175. And as well, I give a shout out to my school, my alumni association, that be Bayan Islamic Graduate School. You can go to bayanonline.org. Again, that's bayanonline.org. Not only could you frame out getting yourself a quality Islamic education at the master's level, you can also check out some of the speeches that they have with some of the teachers, the Dr. Sherman Jackson, Dr. Umar Farouk, Umar Suleiman. You have a lot of people who came through and just great talks. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys. I hope that you have a blessed day as you head into the week. And inshallah, we'll be here tomorrow with more Better Mondays, okay? You guys have been amazing. It's Preacher Moss signing off. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.